Hell at Camp Arrowhead. 2. Blood ties. A year had passed, and Stan stood over the rubble of the old camp cabins that had been demolished right on schedule. He was sure this summer would be a normal one, and he couldn't wait for it to begin. Yet despite the excitement, the events of last year still haunted him. His mind raced with memories of the madman and his lackey. Their eyes, their twisted determination. Most of the other guys had decided not to return to the camp, which was understandable. Chris, in particular, had practically had a panic attack over the phone when Stan asked if he'd be coming back. Who could blame him? Stan felt crazy himself for wanting to return after everything he'd been through. "You thought I was done, didn't you, Stan?" Stan turned sharply toward the voice, and suddenly he was tied hand and foot to a chair. The walls around him began rebuilding themselves in reverse, trapping him in an unfamiliar room. "Help! His words were cut off as a thick gag wrapped around his face, muffling his cries. Stan struggled and moaned, his eyes darting down to his hands, which were bound tightly to the armrests of the chair. The more he tried to move, the more ropes seemed to encase him, cocooning him in a web of bindings. Looking ahead, Stan saw Lou. His neck bore a gaping wound, and he looked like he'd crawled out of a grave. From behind Stan, an equally horrifying Danson emerged to join him. Lou raised a bow, aiming it squarely at Stan. "Time to let you die with dignity, soldier." Snipe. Stan shot awake, his heart pounding. He was back at his post, on the patio of the mess hall. He'd been daydreaming again. "Wake up, Stan. The kids are arriving. No way for a leader to act, sleeping on the job," said Sam, the new counselor. After the incidents of last summer, Stan had decided to take the reins of Camp Arrowhead. When Paul Durst stepped down as camp director, Stan seized the opportunity with pride. He knew the job wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to restore the camp to its former glory. At least those two maniacs were 6 feet under now. That gave him some comfort. This summer, Stan told himself, was going to be as normal as possible. The campers began arriving on the buses, a diverse mix this year, with kids from both inner-city neighborhoods and private donors. Camp Arrowhead had taken a nasty financial hit after Chad's father sued them for safety violations. If the camp hadn't been owned by oil tycoon Charles Haystack, it would have gone under entirely. Even so, the lawsuit forced changes, including welcoming a broader range of campers. Stan didn't mind the changes. He actually welcomed them. But Haystack, the camp's cantankerous owner, wasn't shy about sharing his bigoted opinions about the new arrivals with anyone who'd listen. Stan just thought of him as a bitter old fart and focused on the positive. Stan stood on the patio of the mess hall, watching as the buses unloaded. His squad of counselors included 3 returnees and 1 new recruit. First was Matt, 24, a strawberry blonde guy from Jersey with an athletic build who led sports activities. Then there was Simon, 23, a jet black-haired guy with a mustache and a knack for playing the guitar. Joey, 21, was a scruffy brunette, hired for his impressive swim record at the local high school. Finally, there was the new guy, Sam, 22, a spectacled and enthusiastic recruit who loved team-building exercises and trust activities. Sam meant well, but his eagerness sometimes drove Stan up the wall. "All right, men, let's line up for the welcome," Stan said, gesturing to his team. "We spent the last 2 weeks getting this place ready. Let's have a great summer and make some memories." The counselors took formation, standing tall in their camp uniforms of sky blue shirts, khaki shorts, sneakers, and socks. They watched as the campers divided into smaller groups. Stan's team was assigned 1 group of teens to oversee. Day 1 went off without a hitch. The teens seemed to enjoy the activities. Usually getting them to participate was like pulling teeth. Well, most of them. One camper, Billy, was noticeably quieter than the others. Stan chalked it up to first day jitters. By the evening, the group gathered at the mess hall for orientation games. This was Sam's moment to shine. As the campers settled in, Stan took a seat and watched Sam take the lead on the welcoming activity. Sam walked to the center of the room, holding a sack. He pulled out a pile of cloths and started explaining his idea. Joey smirked, nudging Simon. "Hey, a magic show. Don't you have to pull those out of somewhere, though?" Simon chuckled. If only he'd make himself disappear. Unfazed, Sam continued. "Now I'm going to demonstrate a trust exercise for you all. My father's research shows this type of activity is incredibly effective at building trust and camaraderie." Matt rolled his eyes. "Sam, just get to the point already, would you?" "Fine," Sam said, with a huff. "Stan, could you join me up here?" He extended a hand toward Stan. Stan hesitated for a moment before standing and walking to the center. "Could you please turn around for me?" Sam asked. Stan complied, and Sam twisted a piece of cloth into a blindfold, tying it over Stan's eyes. At first, Stan laughed along with the group, but his nerves quickly began to rise as Sam gently took his wrists and loosely tied them with twine. Sam? What's this about?" Stan asked nervously. "Trust me," Sam said, spinning Stan around. Stan's heart started to pound. His breath grew shallow as a wave of panic washed over him. He could see those eyes again. The eyes of that madman from last summer. His mind raced, and he felt like he couldn't breathe. "And now, fall back," Sam shouted, giving Stan a light push. Stan tensed, but Matt was ready, catching him before he hit the floor. "You okay, Stan?" Matt asked, steadying him. Stan forced a weak smile, nodding as he tried to calm his racing heart. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the past wasn't entirely behind him. "You see," Stan hesitated, "and we almost had an accident," Sam said with a smile, addressing the group. "You gotta trust your brothers here. Even the leader can have cracks in his foundation when it comes to trusting others." Stan's face flushed, confusion flickering in his expression as he glanced at Sam. He quickly regained his composure, clapping his hands to refocus the group. "Okay, everybody, pair up," Stan said, his voice steady. "Sam and I will oversee this exercise. We want you to start building trust with your fellow campers. This camp is about making friendships that will last for years." The campers began to partner up, chatting and laughing as they got into pairs. All except for Billy. The quiet teen stood up and silently left the group, heading to sit by himself on the bleachers at the edge of the mess hall. Stan excused himself and followed Billy. Sitting down beside him, he tried to start a conversation. "Hey, man," Stan said, gently. "I know being away from home can be tough. Big groups like this can be intimidating, but when you don't participate, you're only robbing yourself of the experience." He gave Billy a friendly pat on the back. Billy shrugged off the gesture, his tone sharp. "I'm 16. You don't have to talk to me like I'm 5. I just don't want to hang out with these guys. They all seem like stuck-up assholes. I'm not trusting any of them to catch me. They spent the whole ride up here throwing crap at me." Stan nodded, taking a moment before responding. "Look, I get it. People can suck sometimes. But you'd be surprised. If you give them a chance, they might not be as bad as they seem. A lot of times, people act tough or stupid because they don't know how to connect right away. If you open up, you might see who they really are." Billy looked unconvinced, his arms crossed as he stared at the floor. Stan could tell it was time to back off. "Tell you what," Stan added with a small smile. "Join in when you're ready. Hell, you can even do the exercise with me if you don't feel comfortable with the others. Just think about it, okay?" Stan gave Billy a reassuring pat on the back before standing and heading back to the group. He figured Billy just needed some space. Over the years, Stan had met plenty of campers who started out the same way. By the end of the first week, they'd usually come around and were thick as thieves with the others. He was confident Billy would be no exception. The group continued the trust exercise for 20 minutes. Stan kept an eye on Billy, but the teen showed no sign of interest and didn't join in. As the night wound down, Stan completed his final head count before calling lights out for his group. With all his campers accounted for, he shut off the lights in the bunks and made his way to the counselor's cabin to turn in. Night had fully fallen as he crossed the quiet field. The cool breeze and faint sounds of crickets filled the air, a serene contrast to the earlier bustle of the camp. For the first time all day, Stan allowed himself to relax. Tomorrow would be another busy day, and he was determined to make this summer a good one. Stan walked into the counselor bunks to find Simon and Joey lounging and playing cards. "Where's Sam and Matt?" Stan asked as he kicked off his shoes and pulled off his shirt, getting ready for bed. "Matt's doing late-night reps at the field house, and Sam said he was going into town to buy better toilet paper," Simon replied, without looking up from his hand. "Thank God," Joey chimed in, dealing his cards. "That hipster's been driving me nuts with all his waxing poetic about trust and brotherhood. It's like Chris never left. Except Chris was such a goody two-shoes, he'd probably have to run to the top of a mountain to yell shit so no one would hear him," Simon added with a smirk. The three of them burst into laughter. "Chris was a good guy, though," Stan said, stretching out on his bunk. "I'll miss all those guys." "Hey, look on the bright side," Joey said, playfully slapping Stan's bare stomach. "Now that the Arrowhead Beatles broke up, you've got wings." Joey stood up and stretched. "I'm hitting the showers. Long day, and I smell like a farm feet and whatever the hell Simon reeks of. You two should think about it too." He sniffed his armpit for emphasis. "Fuck off, Joey," Simon said, rolling his eyes. "I'll go in a bit." "Same," Stan mumbled, already half asleep. Meanwhile, Matt was finishing his shower after a grueling workout. The fieldhouse showers were empty except for the steady hum of crickets outside, their incessant chirping echoing through the quiet night. "God damn, they're loud. Is it mating season or something?" Matt muttered as he wrapped a towel around his waist. He turned to grab his clothes from the ledge, only to find his shirt and pants missing. Just his underwear remained. Confused, he slipped them on and secured the towel around his waist, the sound of his wet feet slapping against the old tile floor, filling the empty space. That's when he noticed a note taped to the door. Frowning, Matt walked over and ripped it off to read, "If you want your clothes back, meet me behind the equipment shed. Blindfold yourself, spin around 3 times, and say, 'Yoo-hoo. Heart you best bro Joey.'" "Son of a bitch," Matt groaned, crumpling the note. "It's like Ricky never left." He grumbled to himself as he marched outside, the cool night air hitting his damp skin. The equipment shed was thankfully close to the field house, just a short walk away. Behind it, he spotted a blindfold, clearly from the trust exercise earlier in the day, hanging on a nail. "Seriously?" Matt muttered, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Reluctantly, he tied the blindfold around his eyes. It was either this, or walk back to the bunks in just his underwear and a towel. Feeling like an idiot, Matt spun around 3 times. The dizziness hit him, but he managed to steady himself enough to mumble, "Yoo-hoo, yoo-hoo." The cheerful response came from a voice Matt didn't recognize. Before he could react, a swift kick to his groin dropped him to his knees. Pain shot through his body as he gasped, clutching at his midsection. Winded, Matt hit the grass hard, instinctively curling up to shield himself. He didn't even think to remove the blindfold before another kick landed, this time to his head, disorienting him completely. His attacker worked quickly, yanking Matt's arms behind his back. With a few rapid clicks, thick zip ties secured his wrists. The attacker wasn't taking any chances, adding 2 more ties for good measure. Matt was trapped. "What the... Matt's muffled cry was cut off as something damp and unpleasant was shoved into his mouth. "How about you put a sock in it, Matt?" The man sneered, cramming one of Matt's own black Hanes ankle socks between his teeth. Before Matt could react, the sharp rip of duct tape filled the air. The attacker began wrapping it tightly around Matt's head. 1, 2, 3, 4 wraps. The tape sealed his mouth shut, ensuring total silence. Matt could only groan helplessly as more zip ties were secured around his ankles and knees. Blinded and completely immobilized, he strained to hear what was happening. He could make out the sound of the shed door, creaking open, followed by the shuffle of someone rummaging around. Moments later, Matt felt himself being rolled onto something rough. It didn't take long for him to realize he was being wrapped in a goal net. As if the zip ties weren't enough, the attacker reinforced the bindings by wrapping him up like a tree with bungee cords. A hard tug at his ankles made Matt wince as he felt himself being dragged. But where? And why? Meanwhile, Joey made his way down the wooded trail toward the showers, carrying his shower caddy and a bag of clothes. The downside of the cabin's location was how far it was from the field house. He was sure he'd be covered in mosquito bites by the time he got there. The crunch of his hiking boots against the gravel trail echoed through the quiet night, announcing his presence to the wilderness. He had barely taken another step when something zipped past his face, the rush of air brushing against his cheek. Joey froze, whipping his head toward the direction it had come from. A dark figure emerged from the shadows, dressed in a camp uniform and wearing a black mask. The man stood ominously, a bow in hand, and several arrows at the ready. Joey's belongings dropped to the ground as he threw his hands up in surrender. "Look, whatever this is, it's not funny," Joey stammered, his voice trembling. "I know a good joke, and this ain't it." He hoped pleading would convince the stranger to leave him alone. The man didn't speak. Instead, he tossed a blindfold at Joey's feet and motioned for him to put it on. Joey hesitated, his mind racing. The masked figure raised the bow, an arrow aimed squarely at him. Understanding he had no choice, Joey picked up the cloth and tied it over his eyes. The sound of footsteps approached. A moment later, Joey felt the sharp tip of an arrow press against his back. His attacker tugged his arms behind him, and soon Joey felt the coarse texture of rope as it was tightly secured around his wrists. "I got like $50 in my Joey's plea was cut off as a shower sponge was unceremoniously stuffed into his mouth. The masked man wasted no time, tearing strips of tape and sealing the sponge in place with an X across Joey's face. The sponge swelled in his mouth, soaking up his saliva as Joey moaned helplessly into the gag. The attacker showed no mercy, wrapping Joey's upper body tightly in ropes, rendering him completely powerless. The ropes dug into his skin as he struggled in vain to free himself. Then, with chilling efficiency, the man tied a rope around Joey's neck like a makeshift leash and gave it a hard tug. Joey stumbled forward, forced to follow blindly. He tried his hardest not to trip as the man led him through the dark, each step feeling heavier than the last on the uncertain path ahead. Meanwhile, Simon was finally making his way to the showers. The day had drained him, and he was looking forward to cleaning up before what promised to be another hectic day tomorrow. As he approached the shower house, he noticed something odd. Sam's car was parked just outside, its high beams glaring blindingly in the darkness. "Sam, what the hell? Did you speed to get here?" Simon called out, shielding his eyes as he approached the vehicle. The driver's side door was open, and Simon flicked off the high beams but left the door ajar. "Sam, you around?" he shouted again, scanning the area. A muffled sound caught his attention. It was faint, but distinct, coming from the trunk. Simon's heart raced as he reached inside the car to pop the trunk latch. The lid sprang open, revealing a shocking sight. Inside was Joey, bound hand and foot, his mouth stuffed with something taped firmly in place. His blindfold had slipped, revealing one wide, terrified eye staring back at Simon. "Moop." Joey moaned desperately into his soggy gag. Simon smirked, his concern momentarily masked by humor. "Ha ha 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 ha. Joey, Bear, you must have really trusted Sam to let him do this to you." He lightly slapped Joey's face in mock playfulness, trying to get his attention. Moot. Mo. Joey's frantic, muffled pleas suddenly stopped. His exposed eyes shifted, widening in alarm as he fixated on something behind Simon. "What? What is it?" Simon turned to look, but was cut off as a burlap sack was yanked over his head and arms. The sack, usually used to store dodgeballs, was repurposed with terrifying efficiency by the attacker. Simon was slammed to the ground, his protests muffled by the thick fabric. Before he could fully process what was happening, the attacker began wrapping ropes tightly around his upper body, securing the sack in place. Simon's world plunged into darkness, his vision obscured by blackness, with faint specks of light seeping through the sack's weave. The attacker hoisted him off the ground with ease and unceremoniously dumped him into the trunk on top of Joey. "Asshole, let us go. Let us... Oomph." Simon's angry cries were silenced as two thick fingers pressed the edge of the sack into his mouth, forcing the coarse material between his lips. The attacker held Simon's head firmly in place and taped over the sack where his mouth would be, sealing his gag in place. Oomph. Simon grunted, struggling against the oppressive bindings as he was crushed against Joey in the cramped trunk. "Let's go for a ride, boys," the man said, his tone dripping with malice. "You'll meet up with your friend Matt soon enough." The trunk slammed shut with a heavy thud, leaving the two men in darkness. Bound, gagged, and helpless, they could only struggle against their restraints as the car engine roared to life. Stan awoke to the stillness of the dark cabin. The air felt heavy, and his roommate still hadn't returned, which was odd. His near-dead phone showed it was already approaching 1 a.m. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, annoyed that he'd overslept. He needed a shower and some proper rest. But first, he had to locate the other guys. Swinging his bare feet onto the floor, Stan walked over to the dresser to grab his shirt. Out of habit, he slid his pocket knife into his back pocket, a precaution he'd added to his nightly routine after last summer's events. As he picked up his camp shirt, a sudden loud pounding at the cabin door startled him. Stan quickly made his way over and opened it to find Billy standing there, looking shaken. "Billy, come in. What are you doing out this late?" "Curfew's in effect," Stan said, ushering him inside. Billy stepped in and sat down on one of the bunks, his shoulders slumped. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I wanted to talk to one of you guys. I bumped into Sam earlier, but he just blew me off in a huff and I..." Billy trailed off, staring at the floor. "What's up?" Stan asked, setting his shirt aside and sitting down next to him. I wanted to apologize for being such a dick earlier. I should have participated. You were right. I was only hurting myself," Billy said, his voice cracking with emotion. Stan gave him a reassuring pat on the back. "Hey, it's okay, man. It was just a trust exercise. And trust me, Sam's going to make us do plenty more of those all summer long," he said, with a chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. Billy shook his head, his voice trembling. "No, it's not just that. This is what my old man's always talking about. He says I need to stand up like a man and take action, or else I'll miss opportunities. And now I feel terrible. I blew it." "Billy, it was just a game," Stan said softly. Then an idea struck him. "Hey, remember how I said you could join in whenever you felt comfortable? Well, let's pretend the game isn't over. It's just running really, really late. How about that?" Billy sniffled, looking up. "Okay, so what now?" Stan stood up and turned his back to Billy. "Here's the deal. I'll fall back, and we'll see if I can trust my camp brother to catch me." Billy hesitated. "Don't we need a blindfold or something?" Stan glanced around. "Yeah, I guess we do. Well, this'll have to do." He grabbed a long white sock from the floor and tossed it to Billy. Billy stood up, tying the sock securely over Stan's eyes. "Not the best-smelling blindfold, but it'll do the job," Stan joked. "Let's see if I can trust you." "Wait," Billy said, grabbing a piece of rope from Sam's bunk and taking Stan's arms behind his back. "We need this too. It's part of the game." Stan stiffened. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, suddenly uneasy. "Relax. It was on Sam's bunk. You said I could join whenever I felt comfortable, and you'd go first. Right?" Billy replied, tying Stan's wrists firmly. Stan swallowed hard. Okay. I trust you. Just... you better catch me, all right? Here goes." Stan leaned back and crashed to the floor with a thud. His head hit hard, sending a sharp ringing through his ears. "You were supposed to catch me," he mumbled, disoriented. "Stan, help! It's Mmph." Billy's voice was cut off, replaced by muffled sounds of struggle. Stan couldn't hear, but he could hear the chaos, a scuffle, grunts, and the rustling of rope. Then he felt rough hands forcing him down, wrapping more ropes around his body. "Leave him alone." "Oomph." Stan's protests were silenced as his other sock was shoved into his mouth. The attacker pressed several strips of tape over his lips, sealing the gag in place. Completely blindfolded and bound, Stan could only thrash uselessly as more ropes tightened around his arms, legs, and torso. The last thing he felt was a sharp blow to the side of his head, sending a wave of darkness crashing over him. The world faded to black as he was dragged into unconsciousness. Stan's eyes fluttered open, groggy and disoriented. His head throbbed as he took in his surroundings. He was still inside the cabin, but now seated in a chair, his wrists tightly bound behind him, and his ankles roped down to the legs of the chair. His sock was still lodged in his mouth, held in place by a long strip of duct tape. He had a full view of the bunks in front of him, and the horrifying scene they revealed. Joey lay tied, spread eagle on one bed, a gag strapped tightly into his mouth. Above him, Matt, clad only in his underwear, was wrapped up in a net and tied down like luggage on a road trip. Across from them, Simon was also bound spread eagle on his bed, a fresh duct tape gag over his mouth. From the way Simon's bare feet twitched, Stan had a sickening feeling about what was being used to muffle him. Above Simon, on the top bunk, Stan could make out another set of bound bare feet sticking out from under a blanket. He couldn't tell who it was. "Well, look who's awake," said a gruff, disguised voice. Stan turned toward the sound, his heart racing. The figure was dressed in a camper's uniform and a baggy coat, their face hidden. "Oomph! Mga!" Stan groaned as the gag was ripped from his mouth. "Who are you? Where's Billy?" "Oh, he's here. Want to say hi?" the man said coldly. "Sam, you bastard. When I get out of this—" "Sam?" The figure interrupted with a laugh. "Oh, Stan, you've got me all wrong. Sam is right here." The attacker dragged the body from the top bunk into Stan's line of vision. It was Sam, bound, gagged, and unconscious. "What the—" Stan stammered, confusion etched across his face. The masked man reached up and removed his disguise, revealing a smirking Billy. "Sam was right about one thing, Stan. You've got cracks in your foundation of trust," Billy said, stepping closer. "But you were also right. When people open up, you'd be surprised who they really are." "What do you mean?" "Oomph." Stan's words were cut off as Billy stuffed his sweat-soaked sock back into his mouth and taped it tightly shut. "You've got a lot of nerve, Stan," Billy sneered, leaning in close. "Taking this job after what happened last year. My father would still be alive if it weren't for you." Billy's fist slammed into Stan's stomach, making him groan in pain. "You wouldn't believe how easy it is to sneak onto a bus," Billy continued, his voice trembling with rage. "Lou, the Skinner Hodges. That was my father, the best damn father I ever had. He told me all about how he planned to overthrow that transfer and come back for me. We were going to be together again, and you ruined it." Stan bucked in his bonds, muffled screams pouring from his gag as Billy grabbed his face. "Confused, huh?" Billy smirked. "I know. I look young for 27. My old man liked that. Made running scams easier. But it's fine now. I'll finish what he started." Billy stepped back, pulling an apple from his bag. "Hold still," he said, placing the apple on Stan's head. From across the room, Billy retrieved a bow and a quiver of bolts. "See, my pop and I loved hunting games," Billy said, loading the bow. "But he got sloppy. The thrill of the hunt was too much for him. I won't make the same mistake." Stan broke into a cold sweat, shivering as Billy drew his weapon. With a sickening thwack, the bolt sailed through the air, pinning the apple to the wall behind him in an explosive splatter. Stan exhaled sharply, relieved, but still trembling. "Don't get comfortable," Billy sneered, grabbing another apple from his bag. "I'm gonna kill you, but I'll have my fun first." Stan's heart raced as he wriggled in his bonds. Then he remembered, the pocket knife in his back pocket. Shifting his weight, he managed to reach it, fingers fumbling to pull it free. Billy bent down to pick up the fallen apple, oblivious to Stan's desperate movements. "Just a moment, Stan," Billy muttered, retrieving the fruit. Stan finally opened the blade and started sawing at the ropes around his wrists. The fibers began to weaken. He worked quickly, careful not to make any sudden movements. Billy returned and placed the apple back on Stan's head, stepping back to draw his bow. But before Billy could take aim, Stan broke free and delivered a powerful haymaker, knocking Billy to the floor. Billy lay unconscious as Stan quickly untied his ankles and rushed to Simon. "Hold still," Stan said, ripping the gag from Simon's face. Simon spat out the sweat-soaked socks with a grimace. "Ugh, get us out of here before that psycho gets up." Stan nodded, untying Simon's ropes as quickly as his shaking hands would allow. Simon sat up, rubbing his wrists. He glanced at the floor, where Billy lay motionless. "Stan," Simon said, pointing to the floor. Stan turned his head and froze. Billy was gone. Panic surged through him as he bolted out of the cabin, his bare feet pounding against the dirt. In the distance, he saw the flash of headlights as Sam's car roared to life and sped off the campgrounds. "Billy!" Stan shouted, running after the car with everything he had. The dust kicked up from the tires clouded the road, stinging his eyes and lungs. He ran until his legs gave out, collapsing onto the dirt road, defeated. Moments later, Matt, Sam, Joey, and Simon caught up to him, breathless but unharmed.